Welcome to this edition of the Phoenix House Seminar Series, produced by the National Clinical Training Department at Phoenix House Foundation. My name is Samson Teklemariam, and I'm the Director of National Clinical Training. Today, our seminar topic is Understanding Trauma. At this time, your group facilitator will hand out a pamphlet that goes along with today's curriculum. The pamphlet is yours, so feel free to write on it and use it for notes. Every now and then we will pause this video and your group facilitator will process some of the information we discuss with you. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's topic, so we want to encourage you to participate. Today's seminar will cover 4 topics: what trauma is and how it affects addiction treatment, how to identify types of trauma and other emotional issues related to trauma, the effects of trauma, and lastly we'll share some tips about how to talk about trauma. Traumatizing experiences shake the foundations of our beliefs about safety and shatter our assumptions of trust. 70% of adults in the U.S. have experienced some type of traumatic event at least once in their lives. That's 223.4 million people. People who have experienced trauma are 4 times more likely to inject drugs, which is technically the most severe route of administration, and 3 times more likely to use antidepressant medication. So what do all these statistics mean to you? Well, first off, in order to understand trauma, we have to remove the stigma and labels that we've attached to the word trauma over the last few decades. Experiencing trauma is not rare at all, especially for those who use substances regularly. Many times with trauma, we can be overwhelmed with feelings of, "I'm not normal," when in actuality, all you are experiencing are very normal reactions to quite possibly an abnormal or unfair event. Trauma is really more about the reaction someone has to an event than it is about the event itself. Let's take a look next at what the difference is between a traumatic event and traumatic stress. So, what is a traumatic event? Traumatic events are traditionally defined as events that involve actual or threatened death, serious injury, or a threat to the physical integrity of others. However, in the last few years, the definition of traumatic event and perception of trauma has been redefined. A traumatic event can now include just the witness of something horrible, even if they weren't necessarily harmed or attacked physically. Some commonly overlooked traumatic events include falls or sports injuries, surgery, especially in the first 3 years of life, the sudden death of someone close, a car accident, the breakup of a significant relationship, a humiliating or deeply disappointing experience, the discovery of a life-threatening illness or disabling condition. Traumatic stress is stress resulting from exposure or being witness to events that may be severe or life-threatening. More simply, it is the adverse reaction to witnessing a traumatic event. It is important to remember that different people have different reactions to traumatic events. If, for example, 100 people experience the same traumatic event, each of them could have a different response to that same event. Most of them may walk away without any traumatic stress at all, whereas others may actually experience some serious trauma-related symptoms. These symptoms most often include substance abuse. Now that we have both looked at what a traumatic event is and examples of traumatic stress, we can define trauma as the feeling that someone's reality has been shaken, or the ground upon which they once stood on and relied upon is no longer reliable and stable. There's a loss of predictability and safety when symptoms of trauma settle in, and more often than not, some of us do not have the coping skills to deal with some of these feelings. At some point, we may progressively drift in a downward cycle of wanting to forget or avoid these difficult feelings. So, how does trauma and substance abuse interact? It may seem obvious that many people who have experienced child abuse, criminal attacks, disasters, war, or other traumatic events turn to alcohol or drugs to help them deal with emotional pain, bad memories, poor sleep, guilt, shame, anxiety, or terror. What is less obvious is that people who abuse drugs are more likely to experience traumatic events. Many drug abusers find themselves in dangerous situations where they are more likely to get abused, beaten, or hurt. They also tend to experience a greater amount of loss. For example, watching their friends overdose. Substance abusers enter a vicious cycle in which exposure to traumatic events produce increased alcohol and drug use, which produces new traumatic event experiences, which tends to lead to even worse substance use and so forth. Let's take a look now at how trauma can severely affect someone's life through the development of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. PTSD is a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event. When in danger, it's natural to feel afraid. This fear triggers many split-second changes in the body in order to defend against or avoid danger. This fight or flight response is a healthy reaction meant to protect a person from harm. But in PTSD, this reaction is changed or damaged. People who have PTSD may feel stressed or frightened even when they're no longer in danger. PTSD symptoms are generally grouped into 4 types. Intrusive memories, like reliving the traumatic event as if it were happening again, flashbacks or upsetting dreams. Avoidance, like avoiding places, activities, or people that remind you of the traumatic event. Negative changes in thinking and mood, like feeling emotionally numb, not having any interests, and feeling negatively about yourself. Changes in emotional reactions, like angry outbursts, self-destructing behaviors, and always feeling ashamed. One of the most challenging things to accept in treatment of trauma and substance use is that for some of you, when you walk into the doors of treatment, your substance just might be your survival mechanism. Remember, the symptoms of PTSD are the brain's way of coping with life-threatening danger. For some clients, they describe it as protecting them from the danger within, or the substance is saving them from the unknown emotional pain that will inevitably overwhelm them if for a moment they stop using. In a way, the symptoms of PTSD are the brain's way of coping with life-threatening danger, and whether the instinctive reaction is to cling to a substance that helps the individual escape or some other form of dissociation, the idea here is that they are protecting themselves from this pain. And yes, they are doing it by actually causing themselves more pain. Let's watch this personal story about how normal people, just like you and me, may have dealt with issues of trauma and addiction.
We were in my sister's bedroom. I can remember it like it was yesterday. We were in my sister's bedroom and she said, "I got some of this, you want to try it?" And I did it. So it's just that simple.
Mindy Davidson recalls the first time she tried methamphetamine. Just 12 years old at the time, it would lead to an addiction that would last for nearly 2 decades.
My family functioned out of pain, trauma, and fear. My mom was a single mom with 5 kids and she did what she had to survive. And so that's the way we grew up. That's all I knew.
So she turned to meth to numb the pain.
When you suffer a lot of trauma, you look for something to take those feelings away. And meth did that for me.
Today, the 38-year-old mother of 6 has been sober for 7.5 years.
My kids are my everything. And I was not a very good parent for a very long time. And my kids, I got involved with the Department of Human Services, and so there was the chance that I wasn't going to be able to be a mother, to my children if I didn't get things on track, and so that's what I did.
Through her job and volunteerism, Davidson dedicates her life to helping others living with substance abuse issues.
That was an incredible video, and I'm sure we can empathize with some of this story. People like this must be so brave to broadcast their stories to strangers like us. But I'm glad they have the strength to do so that we can all benefit from their experiences. Now, it's a good time to answer some of the questions that may have been brought up in the video. Take this time to circle together with your group and go over handout 1. Safety is the most important priority. This handout will begin with a quote from Helen Keller, a famous 20th century American writer who spent her entire life overcoming severe handicaps. She once said, "Although the world is full of suffering, it is full also of the overcoming of it." Take a moment now to discuss that quote with your group and complete the handout on safety is the most important priority now. In this portion of the seminar, we will explore the effects of trauma and our physical and psychological health. The essential psychological effect of trauma is the shattering of innocence. Trauma creates a loss of faith that there is any safety, predictability, or meaning in the world, or any safe place in which to retreat. It involves utter disillusionment. Because traumatic events are often unable to be processed by the mind and body as other experiences are, due to their overwhelming and shocking nature, they are not integrated or digested. The trauma then takes on a life of its own, and though its continued effects haunts the survivor and prevents normal life from continuing until the person gets help. When you perceive a threat, the body activates the stress response. During this kind of a response, your body shuts down processes associated with long-term care, and blood is diverted from our extremities to our major muscles to provide us with extra strength. The effect this has on our body includes racing heart, dizziness, nausea, shortness of breath, shaking, feeling hot and flushed, and sweating. It's common to experience a wide range of physiological symptoms even after the traumatic experience. These include parts of the brain becoming sensitized, causing you to be on high alert and to perceive threats all around, being jumpy and anxious. Other parts of the brain associated with memory can actually shrink, making it difficult to consolidate and form new memories. Prolonged stress can affect the development of a number of health issues, including diabetes, obesity, and hypertension. And repetitive stress affects our moods, brings on anxiety disorders, and affects our experiences of chronic pain and our ability to control food intake. The effects of trauma also can cause intense emotion, including extreme emotional fluctuations, unhappiness, anxiety, loneliness, anger, and irritability. It's common to experience a wide range of psychological symptoms, including intrusive thoughts, worry, difficulty sleeping, trouble focusing, bouts of crying, blame or self-judgment, and lack of satisfaction. If you have been through a traumatic event, you may find it hard to talk about your experiences. But it can be helpful to tell your counselor about any symptoms you may have. Here are some questions you may have. How can you tell if it is a good idea to bring up trauma with your counselor? Will my counselor think that's all I am and that my trauma defines me? What if I get upset when I tell my counselor? What if my counselor cries or something? So, how can you tell if it is a good idea to bring up your trauma with your counselor? You and you alone have the right to set the agenda of your healing. If you feel safe with your counselor, trust him or her and share your experiences. However, know that you have the right not to delve into your trauma should you choose not to share. A Phoenix House counselor will understand that you are not being resistant, evasive, or avoidant, and will honor the courage it took to share as well as the trust you are showing by sharing. Will my counselor think that's all I am and that my trauma defines me? You may not know, but a key principle in psychology is that people are complex, more than meets the eye and not equal to one life event or type of experience. Your Phoenix House counselor understands that you are a multifaceted individual and will not try to define you based on your experience of trauma. Identity is a very important theme when recovering from trauma-related symptoms. But remember that diagnosis is used to guide and direct treatment, not to define who you are. What if I get upset when I tell my counselor? It's understandable to be worried about becoming upset, but rest assured that intense emotions are safer in treatment than outside of treatment. Your counselor will know how to help you. What if my counselor cries or something? For many survivors of trauma, there is a deep fear that they are toxic, damaging, and will inflict intolerable pain on those they share their histories with. Generally, the fear of one's counselor crying is rooted in this fear. Due to your counselor's training, he or she will know how to express compassion, nurture, and healing in a way that teaches you that you are not damaging, toxic, or the inflictor of intolerable pain. If your counselor does cry, this does overwhelm you, know that you can talk to your counselor about this. Another goal in treatment is to grow you to a place where you are no longer afraid of your feelings. Finally, remember that recovery means you can function well in daily life, such as holding a job. You are safe, not suicidal or abusing substances. You are able to take pleasure in life. You can control your most overwhelming symptoms. You believe that you deserve to take good care of yourself. With that, we conclude our seminar on understanding trauma. We discussed what trauma is, how it affects us, and shared some tips that may be helpful to you if you are suffering from trauma. Thank you for listening to today's seminar and for your active participation. We want to encourage you to discuss any important relapse or trauma-related experiences you may have had in this group, and please discuss any additional relevant information with your individual or group counselor. We are here to help. Remember, the first step towards getting somewhere is to decide that you're not going to stay where you are. Be well.